Don't try to sneak into your room like that. I know what you've got behind your back. Records. More new records.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Johnson with The Tracking Angle, and this is my fellow classical writer, Mark Ward. And we're here to talk to you a little bit about, I guess, the a preview to the review that I'm working on of this new Ravel Orchestral Works box set with Seiji Ozawa in the Boston Symphony Orchestra that Deutsche Grammophon has just released as part of their original source series. And we wanted to talk a little bit about, I mean, this is a pretty monumental undertaking. This is a
Yeah.
four-record set. Basically, pretty much all the Ravel orchestral works that Ozawa recorded with Boston for Deutsche Grammophon in the 70s in one kind of compilation. And we wanted to talk a little bit about the music of Ravel, the history of Ravel's music on record, and show some of our favorite recordings as kind of a amuse-bouche, as you would say,
Perfect.
to the Ravel
Oh,
review
I'm
that's coming
feeling
up.
so Art Nouveau. I feel like I'm in a cafe in Paris. This is perfect.
So,
Great to see
Mark,
you, Mike.
yeah, good to see you, Mark. Not in the same city anymore.
Alas, alas.
You got really excited when we talked about this idea because you had some of your favorite Ravel recordings you wanted to show.
Oh,
But I mean, tell me about like what is your history with Ravel's music? Because I mean, I've as an oboist, a lot of his stuff shows up in our repertoire, and we get used to his music very quickly. But is a listener, what was your introduction to Ravel?
oh wow, that's a great question. I mean, I never played Ravel in my school orchestra for pretty obvious reasons. It's probably a little bit too difficult. My
Yes.
introduction to Ravel was as a pianist. I was never a big pianist, but I loved playing Debussy. And probably my favorite piano music. And then I did branch out into some Ravel, but Ravel is really difficult. So I restricted myself to certain pieces. But I must have started picking up records fairly early on. And the thing about Ravel is that they're just wonderful sound worlds, and we should get into this a little bit. I mean, what about you? Was your introduction listening or playing?
I mean, probably my introduction to Ravel was his orchestrations, because I think usually almost it's almost tragic that the thing that the Ravel the two Ravel pieces, Ravel works that are probably most recognizable and that the general public knows the most are Bolero, which is brilliant in its own way, but it's not exactly his most exciting work, I feel like. For me, it isn't, but
Well, he
uh
of course said that it was his masterpiece and that there was no music in it.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
there
Well,
was there's a
it's
story
one
about a lady.
theme.
Yeah, there's
It's
a story of the lady at the premiere who just at the end of it just put her head in her hands and said, "Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible."
Well, it's
Go
it's
ahead.
one theme, and it never has any development. There's no development in the piece whatsoever. But so it's Bolero, which is almost used as an introduction to the orchestra for a lot of people. And his orchestration of Pictures at an Exhibition by Modest Mussorgsky, which it's a shame that we know that as a Mussorgsky piece, because as a Mussorgsky piece, it's brilliant, but the brilliance really comes from Ravel's orchestration, I feel like.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
Ravel was probably, in my opinion, the best orchestrator to ever live.
He's right up there with Rimsky-Korsakov. I think
Yeah.
it's Rimsky-Korsakov and Ravel. And as I was doing a little bit of research for our conversation, I found out that like a seminal experience from Ravel's childhood was when he was 14 going to the equivalent of the World's Fair in Paris. And he was exposed to all these exotic instruments and other cultures, etc., which would play into his music later. But he used to go and hear Rimsky-Korsakov conducting in Paris during that time. Can you imagine? 14 years old, and he went to hear him. And
Yeah.
I mean, Rimsky-Korsakov, the feel of Korsakov's music, and he's considered the first of the great orchestrators.
Yeah.
Although I would also say that so is Tchaikovsky, but anyway, that's another story. But and then obviously that inspired him enormously, and there's just no question that he is absolutely at the top of the pantheon of how you use the orchestra.
It's funny that you bring up visiting the World's Fair because, another French composer that's very closely linked to Ravel is associated with the Paris World's Fair or the World Expo, and that's Debussy,
Oh, I
who
didn't
would
know that. Tell me
who would
about it.
go in, yeah, because he and I'm not sure if it was the same, and I'm not sure if there's World's Fair or the Expo, but I know Debussy as a composer was very influenced by hearing the Javanese gamelan at the World's Fair, World's Expo in Paris. There was an exhibit there with musicians from Java, and they were playing the gamelan, and that's all over his piano music.
And and Ravel experienced that same thing, and then it goes right into that movement in Mamba Goose Suite, Ma Merloir. It's in that one movement, but yeah, very influential. And it's interesting to think, like many years later, Benjamin Britten had a similar experience when he was actually traveling in that part of the world, and he went and heard a gamelan orchestra, and then that found its way into his ballet, Prince of the Pagodas, and then into his later opera, Death in Venice. Very influential. But yeah, that's a sort of strain of what politically incorrectly we would call Orientalism, but that's what they called it back in those days. It was everywhere. I mean, in England, it came into Gilbert and Sullivan, the Mikado.
Yeah. Although
So,
I think from an academic perspective, and I'm not passing a moral judgment on Orientalism in music at all, but I'm saying, like, if you can compare like Rimsky-Korsakov, Scheherazade, or some of the other examples of kind of turn of the century Romantic Orientalism, which was very much in music, Debussy and also Ravel use it in a different way because their music is not always invocative of another place, although Spain sometimes comes up as a theme. The French have a fascination with Spain, goes back to Bizet almost. But
mhm.
in reality, a lot of, especially Debussy's music, the textures and the harmonies that he was influenced by from, let's say, Javanese gamelan
Yeah.
specifically, don't find their way as a representative of Java. He's not trying to evoke Java
You're
necessarily.
absolutely right.
He's evoking France. But and so I find it very different than the composers that were looking to use their music to invoke another place. Rather, Debussy was taking these new sounds and Ravel also taking these sounds and incorporating them into his own musical language for things that weren't necessarily meant to be pictures of another place.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really excellent point, and you're absolutely correct. And a lot of it's the chord structures, the harmony, all of that, and it's sort of completely subsumed and then becomes part of the character. It's very important to talk about Debussy because they're often lumped together, Debussy and Ravel, as being
Yeah.
very similar composers.
Impressionist. Yeah.
We didn't rehearse that, folks,
No.
which I don't think is really, it's an easy cop-out way to think about their music, but they couldn't be more different. Something that people don't necessarily know, but Debussy was heavily into Wagner.
Yes.
He was
Especially early on.
Absolutely. And then he had this sort of moment of rebellion going in completely the opposite direction, and really, in many ways, being the father of modern music. I mean,
Mhm.
you think of something like the Prelude to L'Après-Midi d'un Faune and pieces like this. This is the heraldry of 20th century music
Yeah.
before Stravinsky and all these other people. But Debussy, oh, I found this great quote. I just have to read you this quote. This was
Sure.
from an English composer called Robin Holloway, who you may not know about. But he said of Debussy, and the difference between Ravel and Debussy. He said, Ravel is a fantastic machine which cannot go wrong if you obey the instructions. All conductors would say the same. Ravel, you obey. Debussy, you have to interpret. And there is this feeling in Ravel, somewhat different to Debussy, where there is this sense of incredible precision. He was the son, his parents, his father was an extraordinary engineer. His mother was from Basque Spain, basically illiterate. And so he had this complete duality in his own personality. And it's really expressed in his music, where you have this contrast between, having everything very, very well controlled, and then this sort of deep passion, which is sort of kept under control. But with Debussy, I think there's a much wider range. When you start listening to different Debussy recordings, there's a much wider range of interpretation. And you may or may not agree with this, but with Ravel, I feel like, if you follow the score and get it right, you're probably going to get the music right.
There is much more structure in Ravel's music than there is Debussy's music. And maybe we should take a step back for the viewers and listeners and talk a little bit about how these two composers and the word impressionism fits in. Because
sure.
In both cases, this was a word that was labeled onto these composers. It's not a movement they necessarily took up the torch of, although Debussy sometimes did and sometimes didn't. It was contradictory on that. Because we have, of course, Impressionism and painting, and that's when painting moved from expressing very realistic, solid images to expressing light and mood and things the way we kind of see them in our eye when they're in certain light conditions. It's painting that almost inhabits a mood.
Yes.
And if you listen to the way Debussy talked about his music, that's very much what he's trying to do. He's trying to invoke feeling and invoke a mood rather than invoke explicit programmatic events.
Yeah.
And Ravel was a little bit, he was like, what, 12 years younger than Debussy?
Something like that, yeah.
He was aware of Debussy's music, and he's very influenced by his compositional style, but whereas Debussy's music is much more through composed, Ravel's uses a lot of the same harmonic techniques that Debussy does, like the parallels and everything like that. But he's much more adherent to structure, even classical structure in a way.
No,
And
you're absolutely right. And actually diving into this music again, getting ready to review the box and for this video, it really struck me actually how different they are.
Yeah.
They really are very different. And Ravel himself, he acknowledged a couple of major influences. One, funnily enough, was Edgar Allan Poe. He loved Edgar Allan Poe, Tales of Mystery and Imagination. And there is this sense in his music of sort of conjuring up these other worlds. But he himself led this very restrained life, very, very protective of his private life. To my knowledge, I mean, you're probably more up on this, no one really knows anything about his private life, whether he had lovers or anything. He lived with his
he was a
mother
very
for
personal
most of
person.
he lived with his mother most of his life, and yet in certain pieces, and we'll come onto it in like a piece like Une barque sur l'océan, is all about fermented passion, expressed through the story of a ship on the ocean. But there's just this sense of restraint, but he was also very influenced by the symbolist poets. And the symbolist poets, it was all about expressing yourself through symbols. People like Mallarmé, Rimbaud. Interesting, Rimbaud goes on to be the poet for Britain's song cycle, Les Illuminations.
Oh.
So Ravel, I think, is coming from a very different place from Debussy. And listening to all this music again, I really started to feel that. And just to very quickly put a dot on the I of the whole issue of his orchestration, one of the reasons why this set that's coming out and these records we're going to show it's so interesting and key for audiophiles is just simply the sound. These are works where it's like combining all the challenges and virtues of having a great audiophile system, where you've got everything from huge orchestral climaxes to very small, delicate nuances of the orchestra, huge dynamic contrasts going in a second. And really, of the records we're going to show and of the Ozawa set, if you've got your system set up well, this is going to make these records shine. And if you don't, you're going to hear it. Do you want to kick us off with
Sure.
we've probably got a lot of the same records. There are certain
Yes.
real classics here. So,
Yeah, there's some real
so
classics. I want to talk a little bit about the piece that is probably the closest to me and all other oboists on the planet, and that's Le Tombeau de Couperin, which for the longest time, I wouldn't call it my favorite recording, but one of my favorite recordings is the one in this Ozawa set played by the Boston Symphony principal oboist Ralph Gomberg, who had been principal oboist basically from the Munch era up through the early 90s.
mhm.
Um, and if I mean, he's a very, very underrated oboist. He was actually the brother of the New York Philharmonic oboist Harold Gomberg, who played on all the
Okay, so I
Bernstein
thought I
records.
knew I'd heard the
Yes,
name.
the
Okay.
Gomberg brothers. They both studied with the French oboist Marcel Tabiteau
Mhm.
at Curtis because in the mid 20th century, every single oboist in every major symphony orchestra was a Tabiteau student from Curtis. They were all
Wow.
Cleveland's, Cleveland, Chicago, he was an exception, but Philadelphia, Cleveland, Boston, New York, they all studied with Tabiteau. But I want to pull out one that I I listened to a lot in my undergrad, and then I ended up studying with the player who plays on it. And it's
Oh,
this
wow.
wonderful set of Ravel orchestral works conducted by Charles Dutoit and the Montreal Symphony. And this is a London digital recording. These were all done digitally. However, I find it's not the most lush sound. It's not the most dynamic sound, but it is incredibly detailed. These are very detailed recordings, and there is some substantial bass on these. Um, but this is just some of the best Ravel interpretation that I was turned on to early on.
I mean, it's so funny that you pull that out. I wasn't sure if you were going to pull out any of the Dutoit. I don't actually have that one, but I remember so vividly. I was at college when this one came out, the
Oh,
Daphnis and
I don't
Chloe.
have that.
Oh God, you've got to get it. It's still one of my favorite interpretations, and this just blew everyone out of the water. All my friends, we all
Yeah.
went and bought this, and it got rave reviews. And I think this might have been this was fairly early on in him doing all of the Ravel works
Yeah.
with Montreal. And at the time, people thought about him as being the successor to Ensemble, L'Orchestre de la Suisse Romande recordings from the 60s. And yeah, for digital, they're really good. And that's so
Yeah.
cool. That's, this is the
Yeah,
record.
so this is a scary recording for a lot of oboes. So La Tomba de Couperin is definitely the piece I have this for, and
It's
La
such
Tomba de
a
Couperin
beautiful piece.
is probably, I mean, here's the thing. A lot of pieces that are these standard excerpts for these orchestral musicians, they can sometimes grate on those musicians, and we get tired of them. Um,
Yeah.
I don't think I can get tired of this piece. Every time I listen to it, it brings a smile on my face. This is a piece that you well know, but I'll tell the audience. This is a piano piece originally, and a lot of Ravel's works
Mhm.
started as piano pieces, and then he would orchestrate them. It was a piano piece that he wrote. Ravel, when the First World War broke out, Ravel really wanted to serve. He had a couple medical problems that deterred his enlistment, and he ended up, I think, eventually being a supply driver, I believe, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes, but he had a bunch of friends that he lost in the First World War, like most people living at that time who were young men. And he wrote this piece. It's called Le Tombeau de Couperin, which literally translates to the tomb of Couperin, the French Baroque composer, one of my favorite composers of
Me
all time.
too. I love all that stuff.
And he's
Yeah.
referring to Francois Couperin. There's a few, but
Yeah.
and but one thing that's interesting about this is some things sometimes get lost in the translation. He's actually the Le Tombeau, the tomb, is was a popular title for a lot of pieces back then, and it was kind of like as a tribute to that composer. But he was also doing it as a tribute. Each movement was dedicated to a friend he lost in the war. So in one way, he's giving tribute to his dead friends, but also to the past, the history of French music. And in this in the orchestration in the piano part, he does these things that are, well, first of all, the style is in a French dance suite. You have movements like Forlan, Rigadoon, Prelude that are all the type of movements, the structure that you would have had in 17th and 18th century French Baroque music. But he adds all these little touches in the orchestration and the melodies that are like they're coming from Couperin, like the trills and the mordents that are explicitly written out. They're meant to sound reminiscent of that music, even though the harmonic language is completely in the style of Ravel.
And this is very much in tune with what we go on to call neoclassicism,
Yes.
where composers like Stravinsky adopt these forms from the past, particularly Baroque, classical, whatever, and then reinvent them for their own purposes. I would say to anyone, and you will see these records in the used shelves.
This is a dollar record. This is a dollar bin
Yeah.
record.
And they're really worth getting. These Decca digitals are amongst the very best of the period, along with the Telarcs. They
Yeah.
really don't lack too much. Yeah, I need to get that one.
This is a scary recording, though. I would never listen to this for training, though, because my teacher played on this record. He just retired
Yeah.
last year from the Montreal Symphony for 43 years.
Wow. Oh, so
And
he was there through all the hoopla with Dutoit.
the many many hooplas.
Yes.
But yeah, he played on all these recordings. Ted Baskin, my teacher's name, and but he's one of the few people. Ravel marks the opening prelude of Le Tombeau de Couperin at dotted quarter equals 92, which on the piano that can work. It's meant to
Yeah.
be this like flowing line, but it sounds frantic most of the time for the woodwinds if you actually take it at that tempo. So really, most recordings, including the Ozawa and many others, the tempo is more like 80,
Mhm.
84, around that. I mean, that's and trust me, when I play this on auditions, I'm not taking any more auditions for the time being, but when I played this on auditions, I would play it at 80, 84, not at
Yeah.
92. He
You don't
plays it
want
at
to
like 98.
you don't want to do that to yourself.
Yeah, but it's so clean. It's so perfect. This is some of the most brilliant woodwind playing. And the thing about Ravel is the more details you get right, the more lush and transparent the orchestration sounds.
Yeah.
Because in Ravel, the devil really is in the details, and so you have a lot of these older records that get this wonderful mood and this wonderful color, but there's always a little bit that's blurred out because Ravel is so particular and the technique is so difficult. But we can talk about some of those older recordings if you
Yeah.
want.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
wait, I just wanted to,
oh,
before we go on, I just wanted to show you this. I got this from Bob Williams, uh, who played in Detroit. Uh, this one's signed by the
oh,
maestro himself.
oh, that's great.
Okay. Anyway, moving on.
Oh, that's so cool. Do you have all the Dutoit Ravels? Because I've got them on CD. I just don't have them all on vinyl.
I don't have the Daphnis. I have these
Oh, you
two,
must
and I
get
think
the
I have
Daphnis.
one more.
You must get the Daphnis. It's one of the best. Okay, I'm gonna pick a record. You're gonna recognize this. If I said to you, if I had like to get one Ravel record, it probably is this one.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's
And I
see.
have the 45
Yeah.
versus
Okay. I was about to pull those out, but I have I have two of the 45. Is it three 45s or did they only come
no,
out in two?
this is the weird thing about that. They didn't do the whole record. They didn't do La Valse, which is
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah,
Um,
that is insane.
but I bought this when it came out, and it was just as I was getting into the whole audiophile thing. This is classic records, and in the 90s. And I think this may have been the first real Mercury record I'd ever bought, because growing up in England, we
Yeah.
didn't give them. I wasn't aware of them. And
No.
anyway, I was just getting into this whole audiophile thing. I'd almost sold my records, and then I got myself a little Rega Planer 3 used, and I started to realize, oh, there is this whole thing now with records. I'm so glad I didn't sell all my lovely English pressings. Anyway, but I got that. And I was just so blown away by it. And the program, I mean, there's some Ibert on it, which is lovely, but Paul Paret was French conductor working in America. What I love about all his recordings, he's just no fuss.
No.
It's just very straight ahead, and it's so refreshing. And the
He lets
clarity,
the music speak for itself.
very much so, and it applies to everything. Yeah, he's wonderful, and this program is great because you've got the Rhapsody Espagnole, which is one of the great Ravel pieces. You've got the Pavane, Alvarado del Gracioso, but the La Valse on here is just. I don't know if this is the moment we start talking about the Valse. For me, is an absolutely seminal piece of Ravel. Let's very quickly talk about it. It's from
Yeah.
later in his career. You talked about his experience in World War One, and he basically stopped composing for a while.
Yeah.
I think it was really devastating to him. And when he came to write this piece later, I think originally it was going to be a commission for Diaghilev as a ballet. And then when he played it to Diaghilev said, "No way, this is I can't dance to this." And basically the idea is he was always obsessed with waltzes, and waltzes are in throughout his compositions.
Yeah.
And what he does here, as he says, it begins with this idea of out of the mist, and you just hear this low rumbling, and the music slowly sort of assembles itself into this waltz. And it's sort of vision of these people waltzing, sort of middle of the 19th century. But then as the piece goes on, it gets more and more hairy, and it eventually sort of deconstructs and then collapses. And many people have said, oh, well, was his version of talking about the end, the First World War and destruction, all of that. He always denied that. But I think
It's easy to think of once the idea is in your head.
yeah, I do think the piece is very much about that feeling within him of a loss of innocence, of a destruction of what he'd seen, and the falling apart of a waltz. And this performance in this incredibly vivid sound, I think is one of the most violent performances of the work. Another performance that I absolutely love, which this was my introduction to the piece. This is Boulet's, recorded on CBS with the New York Phil in the
Oh,
70s.
wow. I don't know
And
that one.
yeah, so this was my introduction to the piece and to all these pieces actually. And this is a British pressing. There we go. And the thing is, Boulez has always been really good at Ravel and Debussy because he's so good about just getting all the detail of the score, and you hearing all the detail. Now, interestingly, I hadn't listened to this record in a while, and you and I, we've talked about this, how CBS records, the pressings are not so great, but this British pressing is really, really good. It sounds great.
Some of them are very hit or miss.
It's really hit or miss, but you hear every detail. And again, Boulez, it's very held back in some ways, but it just builds and it builds and it gets really, really intense at the end. It's such a cool piece. Okay, over to you.
Well, I mean, you brought out the Perret recording, and I love that, the 45 RPM classic of that. I'm so happy I have it, because when I heard it, the one piece on that recording for me that recording has stuck out with, because La Valse isn't on 45 RPM, is
No.
Alvarado del Gracioso, which is one of his. That is definitely a Spanish Orientalism work, but it's
Yeah.
so dynamic. The orchestra, it's one of the fastest recordings out there.
It is fast, isn't it? Yeah.
It's if you look, it's significantly shorter than a lot of the other recordings out there. It's like 6 minutes or something, and the orchestra tears through it. They're surprisingly capable for. I mean, the Detroit Symphony was a great orchestra, but it was not Philadelphia. It was not Boston. But they really give it their all. That was recorded in the Technical Arts High School, I believe, in Detroit,
Oh, it was done in that building. Yeah.
which is a hall that no longer exists, but a lot of great Mercury recordings were done there. I love all the Perret French recordings. I just wanted to show a
Yeah,
few.
wonderful.
This, I mean, I even though the oboe, I mean, the Detroit in some ways, Paray was very well suited for that orchestra because that orchestra did have a brighter, lighter sound than Boston or I mean Boston had the French style, but the sound of the woodwinds is definitely darker. The sound of the woodwinds in Detroit is definitely more airy, light, has a little more of that French sound. The oboe sound is definitely very French.
You think that's
And
and partly also the Mercury recording they
is
tend to be
so
so bright on the
upfront.
side. Yeah.
Yes. It's definitely the most of all these classic recordings, Mercury definitely had the most like in your face sound.
And there's no sense of impressionistic wash in the sound, which you get
Yes.
from some of the records we kind
No.
of look. I know what you're about to show.
Yes. And I love, is that the speaker's corner?
It is the speaker's
The
corner.
speaker's corner is great. I've had it for a
Is that
long
an
time.
original?
This is an original. It's one of
Oh
my
man.
most prized Mercuries. I adore it.
Have you
It's
heard the
just
speaker's corner in comparison?
I need to, if I did all these when people suggested them, all my
I
life
know,
would be comparisons.
I know, but
Uh,
how does it sound?
it's brilliant. It's much. I mean, to me, it's been a couple components different since I listened to the Speaker's Corner, but it sounds much more. The color is much more upfront. There's less of a curtain in front of the sound. Now, this is a Speaker's Corner I have, which is the Daphnis and Chloe Second Suite.
Yeah, I have that too. That's wonderful. Yeah, and
Yes,
of course the nocturnes.
yes.
Often
The
when
one
you're
that the
buying,
one that I haven't
so I
listened
was
to
just
in a
going to say, if you're
while,
buying Ravel recordings, you're often going to get partnered with Debussy.
Debussy.
Yeah.
Yes. The one I haven't listened to in a while that I definitely want to dive back into is this amazing Mother Goose suite and Ravel Bolero recording, one of the earliest Mercuries.
Ooh, ooh. I have it on CD because I got the Eloquence boxes, but yeah, I mean, this is the advantage of you growing up in America. You were able to slowly pick up all these living
Oh yeah,
present
I got this
Mercury.
years ago. I think at like Encore Records in Ann Arbor. I think I bought this during when I was there for my master's degree audition in like 2014 or 2015. I picked this up.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Oh, I bet that's wonderful. I love Mother Goose. It's one of my favorite Ravel
yeah.
pieces. It was a series, originally piano pieces written for children of friends of his, and then he orchestrated it. And there are recordings of the shorter suite, but you want the complete ballet
Yeah.
because there's lots of extra beautiful music. And to me, it's one of my absolute favorite Ravel pieces. I can listen to that over and over again. It's absolutely wonderful. What else have you got there, Michael?
Mark, it's funny you bring up children's music. I had to grab one of my favorite Ravel works I've ever played. It's his one act opera. It's kind of a children's opera. It's L'Enfant et le Sortilège. Yep. Is that the speaker's corner as well?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I
because the
also
the
have,
originals of this are crazy, right?
yeah, I what I do have though, the first copy that I bought as a teenager was the Ace of Diamonds. And the
Ah,
thing about the Decca Ace of Diamonds, they were often pressed from the same parts
yeah.
as originals. And
You know,
they're
I might have that. I don't know where it is,
it's
but I might have that.
so I'm so thrilled that you actually played this piece. It's gorgeous. It's
It is.
absolutely gorgeous.
Well, it helps that there's an opening oboe duet that's like 2 minutes long.
Yes.
And it's all in his like pentatonic like that it is a little it sounds orientalist even if it isn't invoking
Yeah,
another place. But this is just it's so fascinating to me. And this is of course with Ernst Ansermet and the Orchestre Suisse Normand. It's one of the earliest 2000 series decas out there. And the originals of this are crazy expensive.
and don't you love the artwork? It's so
Yes.
gorgeous.
Yes, and there's a Boulez on Deutsche Grammophon that's also very, very good. And actually, the woodwind playing is a little rounder, and I think it fits a little more. Some of the woodwind playing on here, I mean, it's just so French. It's the Orchestre Suisse Romand is a quintessential. Despite it being a Swiss orchestra, it's
Yeah,
French Switzerland. It's this quintessential French orchestra, and I feel like after World War II, when the French music industry was really recovering the orchestra in Geneva really took up that mantle of a French sounding orchestra.
absolutely. You have the oboe sound on all those recordings is very distinctive.
Yes.
I'm very used to it now, and I kind of like it. But it's very different, for example, from the Cluytens, which we're going to get onto in a moment.
Yes.
But it's a particular sound. But of course, the other thing about this recording is the singing. It's all
Yes.
these French singers. And oh my God, if you're a cat lover, the cat duet, oh my God. And then when all the garden
Yeah.
comes to life. Oh, quickly tell us the story. Quickly tell people
Yeah,
what
I mean, the basic gist of it. I mean, it's funny because when I did this, I was in the pit, so I couldn't see what's going on. But I know the basic context of the story is, I mean, this is kind of a morality tale
Mhm.
of this naughty child who isn't respectful of people or things or the objects in the house, and all the objects, all the things he's broken, come back to life and haunt him.
Yes,
Uh,
and terrorize him.
there's the grandfather clock, and it's almost like a Toy Story in a way.
It really is, but it's so good. That moment after the cat duet, and then things get out of control, and then the garden comes to life. And in this recording, it's like
Yeah.
fairy dust. I mean, I feel this about all the Ensemble recordings. It doesn't matter what it is. They're sprinkled with fairy dust. There's something about the Decca sound, the
Yeah.
performances, be it Haydn, Beethoven, I don't care what it
He
is.
knew so well how to get effects.
Yeah.
He knew exactly what he wanted. He had this vision of the music that was whole and complete. And I mean, it's also a great. I mean, I think this was also recorded in Victoria Hall. I'm
Oh,
pretty
I think
sure.
they all were. And there's
Yeah,
this moment at the end of the opera when the child realizes the error of his ways. He takes this injured animal and bandages it. But but before that, there's this moment where the child says, "Maman, maman," and oh my God, it's just heartbreaking. I've
it
never
is,
seen
and
it live. I'd love to see it live.
it's so interesting that even music that is such a more I want to say juvenile theme, but it's meant to be more lighthearted. It's got a different audience in mind, and yet it's still got these gorgeous moments of orchestration that are he didn't
Oh,
pull any punches for this. It still sounds is serious music. It's some of his
oh,
most
very
brilliant
definitely.
orchestral
I
writing.
mean, if you want to hear Ravel's orchestration skills at their tip top, it's that piece for me and Ma Mère Loire.
Yeah.
You know,
And
the
it's
two,
hard.
yeah,
Some of the presto moments where it's like the notes are flying
I
by
can
and it's all
imagine.
these rhythmic effects and it's just it's chaotic.
I can imagine. Well, since we're on Ensemble, I'll just pull out some of the other Ensemble recordings. There's a whole bunch of them. Um, One of the earliest sets that I got was this set, actually, which gathered them all together.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
like we said on Decca, Ace of Diamonds, and
Hmm.
it's sort of, I'm sure they're not all from the original masters because it's sort of like re put together. Different combinations from the original records, but there's the Ace of Diamonds uh thing, and there's a Debussy set like this as well. But this is a
I need
great
to
way.
get that.
It's on a budget. It's all of them. But I don't. Other than that, I don't have. Oh geez, I have a
I have
number
some
of.
speakers corners as well. Yeah, they're very expensive. I mean,
Otherwise, it's speakers. Yeah. Well, there we go. I mean, that's speakers corner. I've got that here. Yeah. That's
yeah, it's a great one.
oh, it's gorgeous. And speakers corner are very, very doable ways of doing this. Here we goes, La Valse.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I forgot to grab that one. Yeah, I have that.
yeah. And then this this one, which is on
Oh,
King Super
I also have
Analog.
that I did not grab, but I have
Yeah,
that.
I have to say I love King Super Analog.
Yes.
It's one
Yes.
of my sort of niche areas of collecting. They're so good. And then let's just talk very briefly. This is obviously not one of the main orchestral pieces, but this is one of the most beautiful Ravel records you can buy.
Oh, the
Um,
Scheherazade.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of a seminal piece for him.
It
And
was one
for
of his earliest works.
yeah, and but the sort of idea in it, because again, very influenced by Korsakov, by the whole notion of Scheherazade, this idea of this lady having to tell a tale in order to stay alive. I mean, I feel like a lot of his orchestral pieces, it's about telling stories, very much so. And this is the piece. And I think you know, and this recording is just, I mean, Regine Crespa is, oh my God, she's one of my favorite singers. This is sublime, and then you've got the Berlioz as well. But anyone who's into Ravel and wants to explore a bit beyond, this is a record to get. This is one of the jewels in the Ensemble catalog.
Yeah, yeah, I'd forgotten about that one. I guess we should briefly talk about. Well, we can let's show another couple interesting Ravel recordings, and then we can talk about maybe conductors and orchestras that are most associated with Ravel on record. But there's one I had to get out, and it's probably one of my favorite living stereos of all time. It's this wonderful pairing of the Debussy and the Ravel string quartets with played by the Juilliard String Quartet on RCA Living Stereo.
Now
And
that's a record I'd love to have.
I have no idea why Chad didn't reissue this. And I'm hoping at some point he does. It's not a balls to the wall dynamic audiophile recording. It's an intimate recording, but it has some of the best captured string tone I think I have
Mm.
ever heard of any recording on vinyl. Just the string tone on this is so transparent and so translucent.
If you ever see a copy of that, please get it for me.
I will. I
I
will.
would love to have that.
And what I love about this, I mean, Juilliard String Quartet did a lot of great quartet recordings for RCA. They recorded most of the standard repertoire. But what I love about this pairing is you get to hear the similarities and the differences between Debussy and Ravel's composition style.
Very much so.
And how much more fluid and florid and like influenced by like Tristan that Debussy is, as opposed to the Ravel, which is has the same tonal and harmonic qualities, but is also much more classically structured.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, these are glorious works, and there are many, many versions of them. I have the one version that I have is this one. Um, I wouldn't call it an audiophile, but it's the Budapest Quartet, one of the
Yeah.
great quartets. And yeah, I love them. And yeah, it's brilliant. But my God, I would love to have that that living
Yeah.
stereo. What else have you got for us?
Well, the only other really interesting, well, no, there's two interesting ones I wanted to show, and then we'll get to the topic of the box set. But this one, the Impex did a couple years ago.
Oh yeah, I have that. That's great.
We're so lucky that they did this, and unfortunately, it's not in print anymore. I hope they bring it back. But
It's
this
fabulous.
combination of Bernstein playing at the piano, the Shostakovich Second Concerto, and the Ravel G Major Concerto, which is one of his later works, one of the last major works he composed in his life, is just fascinating. There's so much energy in this recording. It's
It's
not the most
great.
gorgeous sounds. I mean, the MPEX did a great job with it, but I mean, I think this was recorded in a hotel ballroom, by
Yeah, like
Columbia.
all of those records. Yeah, that famous ballroom. But it's wonderful, and the Shostakovich Concerto is a
Yes.
fantastic piece. And yeah, and you know, let's just say it one more time. I just think Imbex is one of the best reissue
Yeah.
label. I wish
They
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 would.
do they do titles that every time they announce a title, it's like, I have never thought of that, but it's brilliant.
Yes, absolutely.
Um,
Since we're
so
on
I
the
will
piano,
suggest one to Impex then, as long as the last random record I'm going to show is one that I'm say someone should reissue this because I bet the tapes sound better than what's on the vinyl. And that
ooh,
is, this is probably my go-to reference of Le Tombeau de Couperin.
ooh.
And it's the Chamber Symphony of Philadelphia conducted by Brusselau.
Oh my God, I don't know that at all. But
70s,
what a wonderful
1969
program.
RCA Red Label recording.
What a wonderful program,
Yes, with the Francex, yes. But it's just on
which I
regular Red
don't
Label. It
know,
sounds okay,
but I'm
but
sure, yeah, all those, oh God, RCA. I mean, just imagine if they hadn't gone away from what they were doing in the 50s and
yeah.
60s.
Well,
This is,
I mean, it was a money-losing endeavor. They were doing it for prestige, and eventually the accountants took over, and this is the result.
oh,
But
I know that
I
would
bet
be
the tapes for this are
amazing.
still good.
That would be an amazing record. We have to get on to Impex.
Yeah, and everything about this recording, I mean, of all the repertoire, but I mean, specifically the Ravel, the tempos are perfect, the style is perfect. It's some
Mm.
of the finest playing of any recording out there. I mean, the Boston is great, and I'll talk about that in the review, but I mean, this is for me as a performance as a woodwind player, this one is the standard. And it was my teacher in undergrad, Robert Botti, who still second chair in the New York Philharmonic. He said, when I was a student, this is the one I listened to.
Oh, that's interesting. Since you mentioned the piano concerto, which is one of my absolute favorite pieces.
Oh, I think we're going to talk about another Boston Symphony conductor, aren't we?
Um, well, I've just got two of the piano concertos here. No, this is still my favorite.
Really?
This is the
Oh,
Argerich
Argerich. Yes.
with Abbado. This was the one I learned the piece from. This is one of her greatest records, and this is the Speaker's Corner. It only came in this box set,
I didn't know
alas.
that existed. Is
Yeah.
that easy to get?
Well, it's got the 12 etudes with Pellini, which is on just two-track tape, I believe. So not necessarily a candidate for original source. And then it's got the Michelangelo Beethoven Piano Concerto number one, but I got it for this.
Yeah.
This is just still my favorite recording.
I'm pretty sure my copy of that is the clear audio.
Is there a clear audio version of that?
Yes, and I don't remember, it's been a long time since I listened to
Wow.
it. I don't remember it sounding super exceptional, but
Well, the other Ravel piano concerto, if you must have great sound, this one.
yes, yes, that's what I thought you were going to show. And maybe we
And
could
this,
talk a little bit
so
about the theme. I mean, a great intro to the box set is talking about the Boston Symphony Orchestra and Charles Munch and their connection to French music.
yeah, I mean the chill. Okay, here we go. Yeah,
Yes.
so I listened to this again. So Daphnis is a key piece for me. Huge ballet written for Diaghilev. Um, the premiere was a sort of was a sort of catastrophe of errors and frictions between Nijinsky, who was dancing Fokine, the choreographer, and Ravel was not happy with the experience. But it is the quintessential Ravel piece. But it is such a challenge to record because you've got this huge
Yes.
orchestra and then you've got the wordless choir.
Yeah.
And the thing about listening to this again is it's a wonderful recording performance in that living stereo sound, but the choir is just too present. It's just
Yeah.
too close to you. It needs to be perfectly balanced in the distance. Interestingly, one that's done very well like this is this one, Boulez. And
Oh,
again, I love Boulez, and I heard him conduct live many times, his own music, other music, and I just always loved him. I saw him conduct the last concert they did in Dorothy Chandler Pavilion with the LA Phil before they moved to Disney Hall, and they finished the concert with the Farewell Symphony of Haydn, and they all walked off the stage, and it was
that's
great.
funny.
But this is they reissued a bunch of these Boulez recordings doing half-speed mastering, and they're dead silent pressings, and they sound really good. But interestingly, listening to this again, I found it a little bit. I mean, I love hearing all the detail, typical Boulez, but the wind machine was kind of too close. But it's set out beautifully in the space. But to your point about the Boston Symphony, I mean, the thing about the Boston Symphony, and you can talk about this more eloquently than anyone, is just, that wind section. I mean, I wrote about it when I was
And the
recording,
strings.
and the strings, that beautiful string sound, which in the recent batch of original source, the Tchaikovsky one and the Scriabin, oh my God, that record, the Scriabin Tchaikovsky.
Yeah. I have
I
it on
mean,
pre-order.
oh, just batten down the hatches. It's really over the top, but just that wind sound, the wind and brass. Oh my God,
Yeah.
and the strings. Yeah,
It's a great combination. To me, the Boston Symphony, I mean, I love the Boston Symphony under Munch, and I pulled out a bunch of great Munch
yeah.
recordings.
I don't
Luckily,
have
Chad
that
has
one,
reissued a lot of them.
and that one's
The
out of
French
print.
Touch is also an underrated one. I'm glad they
I
did it.
love that. I have that one.
Um, oh, and you brought up Daphnis. This is the Daphnis recording that I turn to a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you got that out too. But I with the Munch. I mean, Munch
Just
was.
quickly on this one, I actually have an OG Decca of this,
Ooh,
which I can't find, and I'm a little bit alarmed about it. But this is so great; it's stretched onto 45, and it
yeah,
sounds really, really amazing.
remarkable.
But Monter conducted the first performance, so that's why we
That's
have to have
right. I mean, he
Monter.
did so many of those pieces. He conducted the first performance of.
Oh,
His career was
yeah,
so long,
yeah.
but it's interesting. So like Munch, if I'm trying to remember right, I mean, I should have looked this up before we started recording. Munch, because Munch has a German name, but he was born in like the Alsace region, right?
Probably. I couldn't say for sure, but it sounds about right.
Because I think he was educated in France and it more or less is culturally French. So he came. I mean, he was the longtime conductor of the Boston Symphony that was known as America's French Orchestra.
Absolutely.
And I think their concertmaster's name was it Silvestri, or I'm trying to remember the name of their principal violin through the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Well, but when does Thingamy take over? He takes over in the 60s, 70s under who's under Abado, whose name is it Silverstein?
Maybe I'm not sure, but I remember reading up on this and like there was one composer that was like the finest concertmaster in the world is this guy, and that's not an opinion, that's a fact. Uh, But I mean, the Boston Symphony was known for, even though the woodwinds and the brass had an American tone, an American burnishment to them, they really were, they had this light playing style that was very, very similar to the French sound.
Mhm.
And in many ways, they were considered like I mean, and they imported in the early days, they imported a ton of French players back when the
Oh, I
Union would
didn't.
let them.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they really had a large French contingent. This was kind of in the aftermath of the First World War when there was a big exodus of French musicians to the United States. Um, they had a lot of those musicians in the Boston Symphony, and that playing style really did transfer over. And it was very interesting because Ozawa, when he took over in the 70s, there's still that sound in the orchestra, but Ozawa was a Carillon student, and in many ways he did move towards making the orchestra have this more continental European sound. And a lot of that concertmaster, who I wish I could remember his exact name, and someone in the comments will point it out, actually ended up resigning
Oh,
in
really
the early 80s over Ozawa's leadership.
interesting. Well, I lived in Boston during Ozawa's tenure, and it was already uh, mixed. I have to say that when I went to hear him conduct a few times, he was fantastic. And I have to say that on the evidence of the original source records so far, I mean, the Symphonie Fantastique is still one of my absolute favorites of all the releases, and the recent ones have been great. And I'm feeling pretty good about the set. I'm actually really looking forward to your review. See what you have to say.
Honestly, I might be finishing it on a plane, but um, the one thing I'll say is and to head off any criticism early is that that's not a comment on Ozawa's musicianship, which I mean Ozawa is one of the great conductors of the 20th century
And I
and the
think
21st
very,
century.
and I think in terms of his discography, people are starting to wake up to the fact that actually it's much better than they remember it being.
Yes, yes. And part of it has to do with I think that he really came to his I think renown peak in the 1980s when the recording industry was undergoing a lot of changes, and he
Oh,
didn't
with
have
his
the time to build that legacy the way that Munch or that Reiner or that even Schulte did. But I mean, he does have a bit of that legacy here on Deutsche Grammophon, and I, of course, will be covering that in the review. But needless to say, me talking about Ozawa changing the style of the orchestra doesn't necessarily say that his interpretations are bad or that the musicality isn't there. It's just that it's a different way of approaching the sound
Yes.
than necessarily someone like either Munch or, I mean, of course, the Platon.
Okay, let's talk about this. Now, you just got your copy, didn't you?
Yes.
Found this. Have you managed to listen to the whole thing?
Just one record so far.
I dived back into this, and I was just kind of blown away.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a marvelous set. It's
it's this is we should say this is the Testament reissue.
yeah,
some years back. It was done on ERC, Electric Record Company, at a ridiculous price. But the Testament version sounds incredible. I don't know if it
I
was.
can I can say this definitively. I have heard, I don't have the ERC. I never owned it. I have heard one side of the ERC on a very, 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 very expensive system.
Mhm.
And uh, this t Testament reissue and the original, if you go and get the classics for pleasure, I think.
Yes, you have a few of those, don't
Yes,
you?
and I didn't pull them out, but either of those, I believe, sound better than the ERC because of EQ choices or what have you. I think this sounds well. First of all, the classics for pleasure. If people don't know, a lot of these original. This is originally done on Columbia, UK Columbia,
Mhm.
and the originals are unobtainium.
Oh,
They're
do show them the label because it's such a beautiful.
well.
It's my favorite.
This is EMI's. I mean, it would
Yeah,
have Columbia on it, but this is
I
what the
know, but
original
it's
label
so
looks like.
beautiful. It's my
Yeah,
favorite.
that box set, the original one goes for thousands of dollars, and so does the ERC. The best way affordably to get into these recordings are to get the Classics for Pleasure reissues, which were done from the same metal parts as
Yes.
the original Columbia box set that's thousands of dollars. And you know what? You can get them for 10 bucks a piece.
Yeah, they're classics for pleasure. I grew up with those in the
Yeah.
shops, and Cluytens. So Cluytens, a really interesting French conductor because he was good in everything. And I actually have a box set of that they did on CD where they remastered everything, and it's great to have his whole catalog like that.
Yeah.
And actually, the remastering on CD of this set is very, very good indeed. But you put these records on. So Cluytens, for example, he recorded, people don't know this or they've forgotten it. He recorded the first complete Beethoven symphony cycle
That's right. That's right.
with the Berlin Phil. And guess where it was released? On Classics for Pleasure.
Yep.
But yeah, Classics for Pleasure is a great reissue label. And there's also some original stuff for Classics for Pleasure and Music for Pleasure, all English
There's a
press.
few things that never got released, like similar to RCA Victrola. There's a few things that they recorded back in the day that just never got released, and they would get released on Classics for Pleasure.
Well, I did dive into the Cluytens set. I hadn't listened to it in ages, and I listened through to the whole set in one go. It's fabulous. It's so idiomatic. The sound, it's like that perfect EMI sound of the
Yeah.
late 50s, early 60s, sort of slightly mid-haul, but you don't miss any of the detail.
No,
And
it's very transparent,
it,
especially in the highs. And it does have this performance does have, I mean, the Paris Conservatory Orchestra, whatever version of it is. Well,
that's
this is from
later
the
the Orchestra de Paris.
yeah, 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 and this is one of the Society of Concerts of the Conservatoire.
It went through all
That orchestra has so many different versions of itself,
yeah.
but I mean, that sound is very, very similar to the sound of the orchestra in Geneva in many ways. In the woodwind sound, in the lightness, but there are differences. There's substantial differences.
Well, for example, I think the oboe sound is much more comfortable for modern.
It's still pretty light. It's still
Yeah,
pretty light.
but it's not got that reedy quality that you
Yeah.
get in the Ensemble records, which is not to everyone's taste.
Yeah, and it's kind of a shame. I mean, these recordings are so beautifully captured, but it's a shame that we don't have the opportunity to hear some of that sound in person anymore because the French, I mean, in many ways, the sound of a lot of instruments, but I will use the oboe as an example because it's the one I know the most about, has become more global.
It has.
And in some ways, that was the origin of the American oboe sound because Marcel Taboteau was a French player educated by Georges Gillet at the French Conservatory, at the Paris Conservatory, came over to America and he was experimenting with reed styles because what he wanted to do is we wanted to take the French reed style, which is about lightness, about color, about the overtones, and imbue it with a little bit of the German sound. And the German sound is much rounder, much
Mhm.
warmer, but it doesn't have the palette of color that the French sound does. And the goal of the American reed style was to fuse those two together and get some of that roundness while still having the palette of color that the French
Yeah.
sound had.
And I think
And
it's really important for people to understand this because really that sound, the wind sound, the oboe sound, is integral to this music. It
yeah,
really is, it's right at the heart of it.
yeah, it's why when you listen to this, it sounds so different than the Ozawa box. It sounds different than the Munch recording. It sounds different than, especially if you hear any of this stuff when Reiner recorded it with Chicago.
Yeah,
Very,
we
very
haven't
different.
mentioned Reiner, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think this is probably one of the best examples of that. And if sometimes the Orchestra Suisse Romand can sound a little too scrappy, listen to this recording, and it takes that same concept and it greatly refines it like grains of sand.
It's so well disciplined.
Yeah.
And he's just got the feel of the music. I mean, his sense of rubato, all of it. It's really fabulous. Yeah. So should we get close to wrapping it up, I guess? Uh,
Yes, I
and
think we're both really excited about this box set, and you'll be doing a review on your channel, and I'll be doing the written review for Tracking Angle.
I just wanted to
But
show a couple more things very quickly. If you want to
mhm.
just look at some other Ravel, one of my favorite chamber pieces of his is the introduction and allegro for harp, flute, clarinet, and string quartet. And
Oh
this is a
wow.
wonderful recording done
Oh,
by other.
I think I have that. I bought it for
Yeah.
the Poulenc trio though.
It's a beautiful program. The other recording of this I love in some ways even more just as a performance is the one on Deutsche Grammophon, Nicanor Zabaleta on the harp. Again, you want to talk about other chamber music. This has the piano trio and the violin sonata, which Michael and I just heard in an amazing recording. Go to Tracking Angle, read what we had to say about
Oh
that
yeah.
recording from the 50s. And then let's just mention the piano music. A pianist, there are lots of great recordings of Ravel piano
Yeah,
music,
we've kind of glossed over the piano music, and I feel bad about that because Ravel
but
was
we're
such an integral
focusing
composer for the piano.
we were focusing on orchestra for this video.
Yeah.
Uh, but this is a pianist I heard very early in his career, André Gavrilov, and this is a wonderful set of recordings, including Gaspard de la Nuit, which is the fiendish piano work with, Scarbo, the demented dwarf in it. This is a lovely recording. There's also a great recording by Ivo Pogorelic and also Marta Argerich, I think. And this is a set that people don't know about, an English pianist, Paul Crossley, on CRD, which is really, really good of all the
Oh,
piano
I don't
work.
have that.
Yeah. And I just wanted to finish by showing a favorite record of mine, if I can find it, because the influence of Ravel is enormous, but nowhere more so than on film composers, and no more so than on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, John Williams score. And this is a genuine audiophile recording Charles Gerhardt of the National Philharmonic, Kenneth Wilkinson, Kingsway Hall, part of the film score series they did on RCA. And you put on this Close Encounters version, which is the last 20-25 minutes of the score, just straight through. It's all Ravel. It's just amazing. It's
You
just
know,
the
I don't think I think it's been so long since I listened to that soundtrack. I barely remember it, but you're going to
yeah.
inspire me to go listen to it.
Oh, and this is a great record, but hard to find a clean
Really.
copy. Try and find a UK
And
pressing.
that's oh, so you want it on UK RCA, you're saying.
UKRCA, yeah,
Okay.
and find it. But yeah, he's everywhere, and he's just a wonderful composer. And
Even
I'm
in British music, because he taught Ray Vaughan Williams.
exactly Vaughan Williams. I mean, and you can hear his influence in Delius,
Yeah.
all those guys going for. I mean, I would say even in Britain, I mean,
Yeah.
is there a
Yeah.
composer after Ravel who writes for orchestra who isn't influenced by him? I don't think so.
And it's so interesting because he was so shunned by the academic
Oh
establishment
yeah,
when he was coming up. I mean, they would not give him the Prix de Rome. They would
five
not give
times.
he couldn't no that the 5 times for the Prix de Rome. I know they wouldn't let him win an award to
No,
graduate the Paris Conservatory, so he ended up dropping out.
yeah.
And it is so interesting that he would have such this oversized influence on French music, even the music of the French composers that came after him, which were in many ways a reaction to his music, like Les Six, who like Poulenc and all these other composers that really were rebelling against the influence of Ravel. They still respected Ravel for
And
his
I would argue you can still hear the influence, that
yes,
sense of clockwork
yeah.
perfection. I mean, in Poulenc, absolutely.
Even in Francex or Mio.
And then when you get to the later generation, the person I think of always is Dutilleux.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you go find the record by Rostropovich on EMI doing the Dutilleux cello concerto and the Lutoslawski cello concerto, complete
Oh,
polar opposites.
I have that.
Amazing record. But the
Yes.
Dutilleux, I mean, it's Debussy, a bit of Debussy, lots of Ravel, and it's still there. I mean, and even going up to more modern composers right now, it's he's so important. But also for audiophiles, it's this is music that's going to put your system through its paces, and you're going to hear if something's not quite right. It's going to challenge every aspect of your system, and it's beautiful music, very accessible.
Yes, I would agree. And I think his orchestral music is concise enough that most of it is covered in this box set. And if you pay attention to these pieces, it's a great stepping stone into this music, I think.
Yeah, I think obviously the hardcore collectors are going to want to try and eventually find that set with Cluytens. It's hard to find.
Yeah. Go for
But
the classics for pleasure.
yeah,
You'll pay $10 a piece. But
but the
I
new
think we have
set
to
is,
yeah.
yeah,
I think we have to wrap this up. Mark, thank you so much for sitting down with
great.
me and going through all this. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for sticking through this conversation of two sort of hardcore crazy enthusiasts. But it's fun to talk about this.
Yes, it really is. All right.
Okay.
Well, we hope you look forward to reading the review when
Yes,
I get it out
absolutely.
in a few days, and we'll see you next time.